Starting with our first interview, it's called Tax Avoidance and Evasion, Making the Rich Pay. Now, we did an introduction earlier on today and we talked about tax evasion and the meaning and the implications of evading taxes. And when governments, especially in the developing companies and countries, are confronted with strategies and methods to bring about an enduring development, especially, let's use a country, Nigeria, for example, the usual excuse is that the money is not available to fund such an elaborate development strategy, and it's very worrying.
Yeah, and that was why civil society groups, worldwide, started exploring ways for governments to raise funds to finance enduring development that will bring radical changes in the general well-being of the people.
Well, one of such ways in which the government, was supposed to, or is supposedly using to actually bring such people to books who, of course, dodge taxes and evade tax payments is maybe by, introducing tax penalties or fines for people who are found wanting. And I don't know how that is carried out because a lot of people haven't still paid the price of tax evasion.
And tax evasion is criminal because it is breaking relevant laws regulating payment of taxes. So while tax avoidance is the legal usage of tax regime to one's advantage, thereby reducing the amount of tax payable.
Well, it is estimated that poor countries lose as much as 120 billion naira to tax evaders and what I call tax havens. And then you also look at the curious amount, and it's enough to develop a country. Now, if you look at that problem and you look at the institutions thereof, we wonder how this is going to be solved because some countries do not even have a database for such offenses. Well, this amount is crucial to economic development, and definitely we will be looking into it as we go on.
So what strategies do these companies use to avoid tax, and how can these strategies be tackled to raise required funds to finance human capital and infrastructural development of society, especially in poor countries?
Well, to answer this question this morning, and the question is why the civil society groups is starting what has been tagged Tax Justice Campaign, which is a multi-country campaign to tackle tax avoidance. And joining us to take up these issues and dissertate this morning, we have Dr. Hussaini Abdul, Country Director, Action Aid Nigeria. You're welcome again.
Thank you.
It's good to have you. Yeah. We also have Mrs. Justina Okoro, National Chairperson, Society of Women in Taxation Partner, HMAO Professional Services. You're welcome. We also have Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center representative here in the person of Awal Ibrahim Musa, who is the Executive Director. You're welcome.
You're welcome to the studio. I'll start by asking Abdul, well, civil societies actually came up, to tackle government, to tell them, okay, there's another strategies. If you say you don't have money to handle critical projects, okay, why don't you institute this tax regime, where people will be forced to pay tax? And then we had the question really is, what's the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance? Because it's a little misunderstanding in that regards.
Yeah, there's a misunderstanding in the regard. But basically, they all lead to the same thing. That's more resource loss. When you evade, it's trying to just, whether technical or political means of ensuring that you don't pay. When you avoid, it's actually that you actually also are designing a structural means of ensuring you don't. Basically, for us, it is not about the technicalities around what each of them constitute, but it's about how much resources as a nation or as a region are actually losing to that. But primarily the concern is actually around tax break, because the tax break is also another technical way of ensuring that people evade or avoid tax. And this is, many times it is designed legally. It is not that you are illegally trying to solve, but it is the government gives you a break. You have series of concessions, and there are different ways these concessions actually occur. There are about 7 to 8 different kind of tax breaks. And what that means is that you have huge multinational companies coming into the country, investing in the country, and reaping huge resources out of the country and not paying tax. Because before they come in, the government has given them massive concessions in form of tax breaks. The one we are very conversant with in Nigeria because it comes off in day-to-day tax lexicon, is around tax holidays, where a company can come in and the government can decide to say, for the next 5 years, you are not going to pay tax. They are not going to pay tax for the next 5 years. And so you still make huge profit, but you are not paying tax. And so if you don't pay tax, by the time the 5 years is actually coming to an end, you are requesting for an extension. And then when they also do, when they do that, there are other means. There are different ways it's done. And for us, in a country that's actually relies so much on extractive industry, particularly oil, it is quite a huge resources that we are losing. In fact, in Africa alone, we lose about $138 billion to tax evasion. And that is more than the official development assistance we received from developed countries. In Nigeria in particular, where the contribution of aid to our GNI is just barely less than 1%, you know that there's a huge resource gap, that if we had collected the right resources or tax from the right people, we wouldn't have any challenge in financing our development. And for us, that is the major concern. The attitudes of the government to multinational corporation is like saying, we want foreign investors. We want foreign investment to come in. And when you bring in foreign investment, you give them massive concessions. Even those on extractive, one of the basic tax is royalties. Because we say that that part of the economy relies on rent. That's royalty that we pay. Sometimes you are even giving concessions on that. There are concessions on your profit. There are series of concessions and you are not paying. So once that payment is not made, you take a lot of profit out of, you repatriate massive profit out of the country. And then you don't get resources to finance your development. The mistake our leaders always make is the belief that it is only through this concession that you can attract foreign investment. But studies around the world, including studies by the World Bank, indicates that tax concessions are the minutest thing that attracts it. A very recent study done by the World Bank on East Africa indicates clearly that 95% of the reasons why people actually come to invest in the country is not tax related. So if you have the right infrastructure, you have the right financial policy, you have the right basic environment for it, with tax or no tax, foreign investment will come. But the mistake we always make is that we think that it is only when we give all those concessions, despite our infrastructural crisis, that people will come in and invest in the country. And for us, that is the challenge, that we need to get our resources back from this company.
Let me bring Justin in here. You've heard what he has to say, and I recall that I think Friday last week that the Tax Appeal Tribunal brought Mobil producing Nigeria Unlimited to court, and they are charging them $83.4 million education tax to the federal inland revenue. And like he said, oil is some of the defaulters when it comes to tax evasion. Why is this a habit? And then you also look at the taxation of the poor people. They say the poor people are the people who pay more tax than the rich. And you begin to see a rather bad trend of injustice there. How do you define this?
Well, thank you very much. If I take you off strictly on the Mobil issue, it's a cumulative amount of tax over the years that was discovered. And it's what we call tax avoidance, which over the years they have manipulated the law to favor them in such a way that they are unable to pay the accurate amount they were supposed to be at that particular point in time. However, when maybe further checks and balances were carried out, it was discovered that what they thought they could use to minimize the incidence of tax was not the right thing to do, and hence that came up to say you are owing this over the years for the last 6 years. This is an accumulated. But one thing we need to know about tax avoidance and evasion: when you deliberately refuse or file, in other words, you understate what you ought to have stated, then it's a clear case of tax evasion. It's a clear case of intention to defraud the government. It becomes a criminal offense, and they could easily be charged or imprisoned all over the world for it. And that has been the attitude of a lot of multinationals over the years, particularly in developing countries. The idea is to try as much as they can to evade taxes to some reasonable extent. That is not the right thing that should happen. And when you relate it to the poor, like I mentioned, in terms of the revenue that should accrue to the government, if you take up that particular amount, that's a lot of money that could salvage even an educational sector in the country. And it's not only Mobile. There are quite a lot of other organizations, a lot of multinationals. A lot of those, you may not classify them as multinationals, but they are foreign organizations operating in developing countries, including Nigeria. And all attempts is always geared towards minimizing their tax. That's their primary aim. In what ways they do it? Some do it in, let me say, very fraudulent ways. Some do it with connivance again from government officials. There are so many ways these things come up. The aim is to ensure that they do not pay what they are supposed to be, and that have a repercussory effect on the poor. How? If government had enough money, and this is shared among the local governments and various tiers of government, it will have an effect, a positive effect for that matter, on the poor. If you pick education, some say they cannot offer free education. Why? The fund is not there. But some of this money we are losing, either through tax evasion, either through tax avoidance, could be used for the purpose of changing this and improving the standard of living of the people. Now, when you want to look at it from another angle, a lot of multinationals want to tell you that tax avoidance is legal. Fine, it is legal. But what does that tell us? It also says that our own government, particularly in Nigeria, need to do a lot of things, which means the legislation needs to work on the laws. Laws are not meant to be static. They are meant to be reviewed from time to time. You cannot run away from loopholes, and every businessman looks at every loophole they could utilize. But it also means that our legislators should put their feet on the ground and work well, review all these laws to see where there are leakages and block those leakages, so that all these funds that is being lost by the government can be recovered effectively.
Okay, Professor Njani, Mr. Abdul actually made a very critical point earlier that tax avoidance, most multinational companies actually make use of that legal lacuna that we have as far as tax avoidance is concerned, to perpetuate some of the things that they do while transacting business in Nigeria. And my question is, what should be done at this point in time? Should the government just fold its hands and watch and, not perhaps look critically at how it can correct some of these things in the polity?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, basically, it's all bound down to the issue of corruption, issue of inconsistency, lack of, effective policy framework, even legal framework that can deal with some of these things. What we see is that some of the unpatriotic government officials, they actually go on their way to, in the name of getting foreign investors, who they also have interest in some of those businesses. They go, they give these so-called foreign, investors, they give them all sort of concession, all sort of tax, holiday. They give them tax, holiday. They give them credit facilities. They give them all sort of things. At the end of the day, take it for example, MTN. When MTN came to Nigeria, the first year the profit they declare was such that no any company outside, for example, oil company has ever made that kind of profit. They did not only stop at that. Other companies, other communication company, after enjoying the so-called tax holiday, they either change their name in the case of Econet, to another name, and they still apply for the same tax holiday. And there are quite a number of them that they continue to do that. Why? Because some of the government officials who are actually approving this, and they have business interests in those things. They go there to get them to come, and have a deal with them, because that is just the understanding. Because the whole process is not transparent. If the tax holiday, it is a very transparent, and it has a coherent, process, then you could not make that kind of assertion. But in a situation whereby there's no clear, process, transparent process of giving this kind of tax holiday, it's a serious concern, to us. Then also, we also discovered that because the president, the minister of finance, the NIP, National Promotion, NIPC, all of them, everyone is doing, this so-called, tax incentives thing. If you check their offices, their website, you see that each one of them is struggling to get this so-called foreign companies to come. And there's no any harmonized process, to say that, okay, we are doing this thing, for the purpose of achieving, our national development objective, But simply because, in the process of doing that, you found out that, there is interest by some of those government officials given the trust and the responsibility to ensure that they regulate or they conduct this, So for me, I think, and that is why civil society is concerned with the huge loss, like, Hussaina has rightly mentioned, We cannot be claiming to say that we don't have resources when we are using our hands, our own, opportunity to throw away the resources that will have been put to development, and then we keep on saying we don't have money. Look at all the state, virtually all the state governments, if you take away Lagos and maybe some people, 1 or 3 states, none of them can actually stand, on because they do not have the tax practice policy in place, And at the federal level, because there's this conscious and deliberate effort by some of the government officials working to connive with some of the companies, not necessarily even the foreign companies, even the national companies, to, change the thing. Is just like in those days, NEPA, you have a bill of 10,000 naira, some of the NEPA official will come, you give them bribe of 3,000, they will change the metering thing, and then you discover that you are not, actually supposed to pay 10,000, you're supposed to pay 3,000, So all those fraud are there and nobody is detecting because this country is just free for all the criminals activities that you want to do. So for us in civil society, and that is why first and foremost, before we embark on this, we decided to do what we call, tax baseline study, to understand the perception, of Nigerians, on how.
I was going to come to that. I was going to ask you that, how do we get out of this quagmire? Because you've painted a very not so good picture, which shows that Nigeria is actually not ready to put a stop to this tax evasion and tax avoidance, problem. So how do we get out of this quagmire? Because there are countries who actually thrive on whose economy thrive on tax. I give Norway as an example. That country is one of the richest countries in Europe. So how do we get out of this quagmire?
It's very simple. If Nigeria and Nigerians are ready, to stop corruption, to put, infrastructure in place, to put system, and policy and legal framework that could ensure that, there's a absolute compliance, and whoever, no matter how powerful, how big you are, if you break the law should also apply to you. If we are ready to do that, then it is possible that we can get out of this, mess. The other thing is, you see that landlord, for example, in this Abuja, in Nigeria, they didn't pay any tax. They own, you see one person owning like 100 houses collecting tax. I mean, what do you call it? Rent. But he or she is not paying any rent. Go and check all over the world. That is not the case. You are riding 20 million car, and you are not even paying what is due for the government to do that. So it is the ordinary person selling pepper, selling